Well, thank you everybody for taking the time to attend. And this webinar, we're really going to focus on the initial part of kicking start your ERP project, really selecting the right ERP and the different elements that we recommend you invest in as you're doing that. I'm Chinkal Patel. I'm one of the partners at Mantrax, and throughout my last 25 years, I've invested a lot of time and completed a lot of projects and digital transformations, including ERP projects. Over to you, Michael.
Yeah, my name is Michael Benedit. I'm an independent ERP advisor. I've been in the ERP industry for the small and medium-sized software industry for about 20 years. I've helped, 1,500 or so SMBs in all types of industries, better understand what their software needs are in the industry. What we're going to do today is, as you can see, Chinkal and myself, this is the first time that we're working together. That's really great. I'm excited about this. But we're going to take the communicative information and knowledge that we have between us, and the webinar that we're going to be talking about today, the information that we're going to be talking about is going to take both of our experiences and put them together. So some of the information might be specifically or more geared to, a large enterprise. Most of it's going to be geared to the mid-sized business or even the middle, the smaller businesses. So what we're going to talk about, what the agenda is going to be is, we're going to originally start off with a discovery, what the discovery is all about. We're going to talk about the evaluation team. We're going to have what the requirements document is. That's a really important thing. Shortlisting vendors. We're talking about a well-structured evaluation, going into the demos and the biases of vendors, and then at the end, scoring and weighting of the information that you're going to get when you're actually doing the evaluation. We're hoping to be around 25 to 30 minutes. That will give us time to answer any of the questions that you guys might have.
Okay, great. So the first part really is, starting with a quality discovery phase. Sometimes what happens is, teams spend so much time getting the ERP project approved, and once they get the approval, it's go, 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 right? I need it yesterday. But it's essential to take the time to understand the business history, the mid to long-term plan. What is the technology history at the company? What are the requirements? And Michael's going to deep dive into the business requirement as well later in the section. And then what is the impact of emerging tech in your industry, right? Obviously, AI is a buzzword, but do you have the internal capacity to assess that? So common pitfalls of not doing discovery, I'm sure all of you are aware of them, but by not investing in discovery, really you're increasing the magnitude of the potential risk and the probability of them actually rising and the impact they're going to have if you don't invest it. Budget, scope, misalignment, right? And the goal of the discovery really is, to me, is change management. As you're evaluating critical workflows, implementing the tech history, pinpointing root causes, you're investing in kickstarting a transformative, informative, collaborative process. You're building alignment and engagement. And all of this feeds into creating a realistic plan. Remember, the company you're working with or the company you're at, they have an ERP history. There have been good experiences or bad experience. And everybody doesn't want to roll their eyes and be like, okay, another digital transformation is going to be the same story, different flavor of the month. By doing this, you're kind of giving them a different experience. So typically, at Mantrax, we look at starting discovery by first speaking with the leadership about what is their business vision? Where is it going in the mid to long term? Then we engage with the leadership, feeding in the directive from A and having a conversation about what does a successful project look like? And then getting the broader implementation team, subject matter folks involved to looking at the different pillars of a discovery: functional, technical, customer, market trend. So imagine if you had a conversation with the president and they were thinking of acquisitions and vertically integrating. And the team at C, the functional people, they've been there for 20 years and they haven't seen the company move fast enough to even think about vertical integration. The CEO is educating and going to MIT workshops on AI, and the internal team is too busy shipping a product, and they can even think about AI right now. So going in this order is really helpful to get context and drive change at a meaningful pace. So this is just a blueprint. It's we recommend tailoring the discovery for each customer, but this is a framework to kind of start with.
Chinkal, who should be involved in the discovery?
Yeah, so going back to this one, again, this is if you're a small business, you might be just talking to the president and the project team and the subject matter expertise in all of these conversations, right? If you're in a mid-sized organization, you might really want to talk to the CEO, because if the CEO has a vision to rapidly grow, or maybe if the company is now backed by a PE firm, he's going to be thinking a lot differently than he was 5 years ago, right? So typically, the business objectives, I recommend the C-suite, the president. Then that feeds into a project leadership team, which is who's responsible for delivering the project success. And they should know what is the AI mandate, what is the scope, the midterm and long-term scope, and then have the A and B conversations feed into a conversation with the C team, the functional subject matter experts, the process owners. So it depends on the size of the organization, but this is typically what I would kind of be my go-to starting point. So who should be in your internal evaluation team? We're not talking really about the project team yet, but just the evaluation team. And this is difficult to do. And there's always theory, right? In theory, everything sounds good. Cross-functional representation, people who understand technology, master data setup, PO to payment, SO to invoicing, IT resources that have configuration knowledge, data migration knowledge, neutral cross-functional viewpoints. Again, if you sometimes ERP teams are the person who knows the ERP system most in their company and they've been with the company the longest, but do they really have the ability to contextualize what we just talked about in the previous section? The CEO is now backed by a PE firm. He's thinking about vertical integration in 5 years. He's thinking about selling, and he's thinking about maybe having continuous and discrete processes. What a subject matter expertise who's been with the company for 30 years and has superior detailed knowledge about everything have the capacity and the neutral objective to bring in those viewpoints in the evaluation team? Likely not, right? And then do they have the capacity and the capability? Sometimes people just want to come in and be part of the project team because it's a promotional thing, or I want to prove it's a young new blood. But do they have the time and the capability? So this is, again, it's not an exhaustive list, but a few things to kind of think about. And as you're looking at the team, even in the vendor evaluation team, think about the objectives, think about the KPIs, functionality, mandatory versus optional, evaluation process. At some point, you're going to decide between two vendors potentially in your evaluation. What is the process going to be to pick the final one? Decision escalation process, and establish skeptics. Vendors have a very sophisticated sales process, fancy presentations. They'll even have a boardroom demo already in their plan. So establish someone that you think is neutral, can have the midterm to long-term plan, understands the depths of ERP systems, to be a designated skeptic who can attend all the meetings and ask the wise questions for the edge cases that you may be overlooking as you're going through the process.
Yeah, another question for you. Is there anybody that shouldn't be part of the team?
Yeah, great question. Sometimes, I think don't default to the person who knows the current ERP systems the most. Don't default the person who has the most availability, because sometimes, or who survived the last implementation, because sometimes those people may have some inherent biases. I did a project once where a subject matter expertise was with the company for 40 years, and she was the lead for the previous 3 ERP system. And when we started this new ERP implementation, I said she could not be involved. And it was a dynamic conversation. And she literally had to sit out for the first 3 months of the project, and then she was brought in. So I think sometimes you have to make the tough decisions of who to have in the room.
One of the things that happens once you sort of have that team going now is a requirements document. So the requirements document is all about creating your must-haves, your nice-haves, checklists, that kind of information, literally being, or, the why are you looking at new software? Why do you need to implement new software? So, looking at the requirements document, thinking about the true needs of the business, not the needs that you think that you might need, but the ones that you're actually looking at, creating an objective criteria, making sure that the information that's on that list from the team that you've created now is giving you the information on these requirements so that when you're looking at it for, in your evaluation processes, that you actually have a reference as an example. It also helps you align stakeholders. So, your team, if it's a small team, it's one scenario, but if it's a larger team, what might happen is, there's different opinions on what should be part of it. And it's hard to get those people agreeing. So this aligns, the priorities, the stakeholders to make sure that once the document is created and when you start going through the evaluation process, everybody's on the same page, right? It identifies, in the requirements, looking at it, it also defines your businesses, your true needs. It also identifies your business gaps, as an example, any opportunities that might come up. So as you're going through and talking to all of your experts, this might help. It reduces scope creep. Great word in the world or in the industry, at least now. Scope creep is all about, you actually have a requirements document. You start sitting in front of your vendors or your prospective vendors, and they start talking to you about, well, what about this and what about that? And somebody in the team says, well, that sounds really cool. Maybe we should do that. If it's not part of your document, it prevents or reduces a lot of that scope creep. And it's also used, to create it as a reference at the end. So once you have this document, consider it as that guide that says, this is what we're really looking for. And unless something is really comes up that nobody thought about, then that's what we should actually be considering. Categorization requirements. So once you have the document created, think about categorizing them. There are must-haves versus nice to have. Sometimes people use should-haves in there. What this does is gives you the ability to then further on, we're going to talk about, scoring this information, but this gives you the ability to actually determine what are the most important pieces of this. So not every vendor that you're going to talk to is going to have every piece. If they do, that's a really good thing, but most of the time that doesn't happen. So at least you'll be able to categorize them. You'll be able to then decide which ones are more important than others, as an example. Assigning ownership. It's great to have something on the document, but if, I am responsible for this particular piece, then that's important for the team to know that I will make sure part of the evaluation process that it's being covered properly, as an example. Focus on business outcomes, literally making sure that what you're looking for in your requirements document will help you at the end of the day. Prioritize those requirements like we sort of talked about, and acknowledging AI. So AI is, as like Chinkal talked about earlier, that's sort of one of those big phrases in the ERP industry nowadays. AI is a big thing. Sometimes people might not need it if they're small, but if they're mid-size or larger, it might be important for them to actually consider what AI can help them do. And then further down, how is the vendor going to be able to associate with them?
So, Michael, with requirements documents, it can, depending on who's writing them, it can turn into like a 3 month, 6 month, or even longer exercise, right? Especially if you get into
Yeah.
quality test management and all that kind of stuff. So, what do you have a recommendation on this kind of structure or how much time to spend on it?
Yeah, and great question, but it's all about the size of the organization. You and I were talking about it earlier, and I've talked about it on many times where, you know, if you're a small business, as an example, it could be, a day or a few hours because a lot of times smaller businesses don't need or don't have even what they really want. It's one of those things where the vendor might help them work through the processes. at a larger organization, or a municipality or something like that, they have their own processes and they have their own requirements. And this could be weeks. It could not, it could be, weeks that actually generate those requirements.
Great. The fourth point we want to talk about really is, create a vendor shortlist before you start actually maybe reaching out to potential vendors, right? It is information abundance is the era that we live in, right? So with marketplaces, G2, LLM, social media, LinkedIn, information access is not the challenge, right? If you're looking at some of the larger ERP systems, they have their own learning centers, their own academies, their own how-to videos. Some of the smaller ones might not, but all that information you're consuming, it's not access anymore, and it's not ease. It's really being the valuator, driving the right insights and not getting trapped in the vendor's narrative. Secondly, assess the industry fit. If you're manufacturing, is it discrete versus continuous? How many customers do they have in continuous versus discrete? What do you need? Does it have field service, freight tracking, e-commerce, compliance? If you're in pharma, cosmetics, food manufacturing, GMP, FDA, Health Canada are big things. And this is a short list, obviously, but the point is, for your industry, assess the fit. Do they this, and what other systems is your enterprise using? Do you have IoT devices? Do you have PLCs you want to read data from? Do you have freight tracking? Do you have field service tools? So if you are big in field service and your workforce wants to use a mobile app, all ERP systems that they say is mobile friendly, but is it really mobile friendly? Can it do the scan codes, right? Is it going to integrate? If you're a large organization and your sales team, you have 3,000-4,000 salespeople, and they also need a Salesforce type of platform, is it going to integrate well with your ERP systems? So again, like a lot of these things you can now do without even calling the vendor. Information is there. Focus on the insights and doing quality research. And what matters when you're looking at the vendor list really is, it's one of the things that people forget often is, remember, ERP is a software project or product, sorry. Itself is a product. Where is the ERP vendor in their own journey? Are they a mature company like IFS, SAP, Epic, or are they a new ERP vendor? Because there are so many options now. I think, Michael, I forgot to put the research in there about how many ERP options there are by sector, right? We're talking maybe hundreds or thousands now, right? So understand where the ERP vendor is in their own product development journey. Do they have a good track record of releasing updates? Do they have an R&D product map? AI, again, are they just remarketing and rebranding what they're hearing? Or do they really have an R&D department that's capable of developing machine learning capabilities in the ERP system, natural language search bars in the ERP system, so you don't have to have BSAs writing queries, SQL queries, and functional documents for report generation anymore? Does it have, an LLM capability embedded so you can do quick searches? Functional feet. Okay, yeah, they have all the modules they need, but do they have the depth that you need of each of the functionality? It might be the type of companies you want to set up, or business units, how you want to roll up the divisions, or it could be traceability for quality products. Do they have or customization of certificate of analysis for if you're doing contract manufacturing, right? So go into the depth of the functionality, not just the high level macro modules checklist. We talked about integration, total cost of ownership. Yes, you're going to look at licenses, but implementation is always goes over budget. And then support. The other one big thing I often see people forgetting is resources. If you're a small organization, you might be okay to work with the ERP vendor and their support plans and SLAs. But if you're on the larger end of the SMB or mid-market, you should really be thinking about, if you're not already, do you have a competent, technically skilled ERP resources in-house? And if you don't, as you're selecting this new ERP system, will you be able to hire talent easily to build your team? I'll give you an example. I was at a nonprofit client yesterday. They are on Oracle. Their in-house ERP expert, they have 3 of them. No, none of those people, they've been working on Oracle for the last 35 years. None of them actually have ever gone to the Oracle website to see what the Oracle's roadmap is for their payroll functionality. So, are you training people, but are they acquiring knowledge at the right speed is another thing. And then customer retention. If you're looking at the ERP vendor, what is their loyalty signal? Or is there a high churn, right? Like ask for relevant customer reports, or make that as a to-do list on your evaluation. So some of the things to keep in mind. I mean, this is again not an exhaustive list, but
Yeah, so you can go to the next one. We're just looking at time here. So a well, a well-structured vendor evaluation. Couple things to think about here is, making sure or be prepared when you're going into the vendor, right? So maybe we can actually sit, yeah. So be prepared when you're going into the vendor. Make sure that everybody has that evaluation criteria or the business requirements that we're talking about. Create a weighted scale model in that document to allow the different people that are going into the evaluations to actually, scale or identify each one of the requirements to their own. And then you can put them together, including the department stakeholders, and access everything that they're, or assess everything that I should say that you're looking for. That doesn't mean just the functionality. That means, like Chinkal was talking about a little bit, what's their roadmap like? In the small business world, one of the things that always come up is how can you as an organization relate and associate to the vendor that you're working with, right? Because in a lot of cases in the small world, what happens is, that vendor is both the software vendor, but they're also the implementer, and they're also your support team. So it might be all together as an example. So depending on, again, the organization, but remember to think about that too. At the end of the day, this organization that you're working with, you're going to be working with for a long time. So just to make sure that you actually have that information and when you're actually talking about your team.
do you want me to go to the next one?
Yep, next one, please. Yeah. So process walkthroughs should be non-negotiable, non-negotiable. This is all about making sure that you're in control of the walkthroughs, the discussions that you're having with your vendors. Okay. So, make sure that you're in control. Make sure, vendor salespeople love to be in control of the demo and in control of the discussion. It's your solution that you're wanting to deal with. So make sure that you're in control about that. Make sure that you're actually looking at both standard and non-standard scenarios or exceptions when you're looking at demos in itself. Have your team participate, and ask questions during the demos. That's an important thing. Look at what you are seeing in the software when you're doing, your walkthroughs as an example, to make sure that you can identify or document any gaps or workarounds or custom that might need to be done. Okay. And score based on the demonstration that you might be seeing, not on the assurances, that kind of thing. I used to love to, as a sales rep in an ERP world saying, yep, we can do that. That's an assurance. As a consultant, you should be wondering, can it really be done? And make sure that you call that person out later.
Okay, just to kind of, again, I want to leave some time out, so I'm just quickly
Yeah,
go through,
exactly. Yeah.
why vendor-led demos are inherently biased. So for many reasons, right? The vendor is going to have their sales process, and they should, if you're, because you want to be respected when you contact them to make sure they have a process they're walking you through. But keep an eye on that, they're not controlling the entire process, because you might miss key things like configuration versus customization. Does it really mimic your workflow? What is are they cherry picking, and do they have, yes, we can do that syndrome, right? So to avoid that, reframe your evaluation. And a couple of things that I strongly recommend, depending again the complexity of your business, is tailor the demo to your product, your process, and your sample data. Invest in the end-to-end workflows, sales invoice, sales order to invoicing, and structure the demo. And this is where you actually invite the people who are in the weeds and are the nitty picky, because they're going to catch those things. Assess all modules equally. You don't include the subject matter who's the operations key, because they might not ask for all the finance questions, right? And assess the edge cases, trust test application. And one of the things that's really worked out is maybe have an evaluation budget, because sometimes your evaluation, the ERP is going to cost quite a bit of money. You might be worth out allocating 10K for your last three finalists to really invest in a paid demo where the ERP vendor doesn't think like you're going to use their time and not buy it, right? So we can talk about this in the Q&A a little bit. I'll let you get to the
Yeah.
last one.
Yeah, and lastly, really quickly here, scoring and weighing the evaluations that you're actually getting to. Next slide. So yeah, so one of the things to we were talking about sort of defining information, but make sure that you actually and your team knows what those categories are before the demonstration. Weight the different requirements. Some of them might not be as important, for a better word, than other ones. So make sure that that's done. This gives you the ability for consistent scoring across different vendors. So if you're doing, if you're actually looking at 2 or 3 vendors in demos or in processes, this gives you the ability to actually have a framework around all that. And I think Chinkal talked about this, include functional and non-functional stuff already in that, right? So turning scores into defensible decisions. Bottom line here, this gives you and your team the ability to say, this is what we learned based on our requirements versus biases versus anything else. It's all based on then, what we actually learned in the system versus I really like this guy versus that guy better. Okay. Insights from, our experiences, upfront investment in planning and vendor selection is definitely important. It's going to increase your success of selecting the right solution. And one of the things to remember is, depending on the size, again, will depend on, how big of an investment that is. Tailor your upfront assessment to your organization. Don't let a vendor tell you what you need. It's up to you guys to make sure, or it's up to the client to make sure what they actually need. Be strategic about the process. Make sure that you guys know or they know what's the next step in the process, who's going to be involved, what part of the requirements document is being used, and take control of the vendor evaluation process. As a salesperson or as a vendor, their job is to show you the best of their solutions. It might be good, but you might not even need one of those pieces. So make sure that you take control of the evaluation process. It is your software. And remember, at the end of the day, I think I said this already, this is one of the most important, company acquisitions that your company will have. Okay, you're going to be using this organization or working with this company for many, many years to come. Make sure that you can work with them.
Okay, great. So I'm going to stop the presentation and really have a discussion. I see Yvette has typed 2 questions. The requirements document belongs in the sales process? I would say yes, at least at a high level, right, Michael? That you
Yeah.
need to have at least what your must-have optionals are, right? Because if you're not going into that with that, then it might be a challenge for you to evaluate. The second question Yvette had was, should small businesses intentionally partner with SME vendors? I often see small enterprise contracts with big firms only to find themselves paying for complex features and unrequested upgrades they don't actually need.
Yeah, I'd love to respond to this one. So the answer is, people are talking to themselves about being an SMB and therefore I should be looking at an SMB vendor, or I'm large versus, I need a large solution. It's all about your requirements, to be totally honest with you, in that scenario. But in most cases, you're absolutely right. SMBs, are going to be looking at SMB solutions, but make sure that SMB solution that you're looking at meets your needs. Okay, it's really important. That's the most important part of this whole discussion, is making sure that your needs are met by the vendor or the solution that you're going to be acquiring.
Yeah, one of the things I'll mention, Michael, that we didn't talk about really is, Michael and I are really invested in vendor agnostic, neutral evaluations, right? Like, we're not tied to any vendors. So we're really going in as an open slate. Augie, I see you have a question. Please go ahead.
Yes, yeah, this discussion is very interesting to me. It's very pertinent to what I'm doing. Michael, I'm building a business of advisory revolving around doing a lot of upstream work before an implementation of a new ERP, starting with like a systems diagnostic where like I map out all the entire technology system architecture of the company and find the issues that need to be corrected in order to ensure a more, a more successful implementation project, coming up with a plan for the data migration. My question for you is how early do you start in the process before the implementation, and then how deep do you get involved in the implementation, like hands-on, actually like implementing the ERPs? Do you do that with some of the ERPs or all of them? I'm vendor and application agnostic as well. I'm providing like neutral, unbiased advisory.
Yeah, so really good question. Thanks for it. So I start right off at the beginning. So, in the SMB world, and I'm guessing, not as much in the larger enterprise world because they've already sort of gone through this once or twice and they have the team. But in the SMB world, what happens is somebody says, I think we need new software, but we're not really sure what we need and why we need it. I will actually go in and hold their hand through the requirements process. I will not write it for them, but I will help them write it. I'll be there. I might take the notes and I might put that document together for them. But at the end of the day, it's them. I will help them, search for the applicable vendors, the solutions that might be applicable to them, and then work with them in the evaluation process so that when they're going through it, I can be their eyes and ears. In a lot of the SMB world, these guys or this organization don't have additional people. They're the team that is actually running the ERP or that's looking for ERP is the actual team that's running the business, and therefore they don't have the whole day to actually manage an ERP implementation. So having someone there to sort of be their eyes and ears, to hold their hand, is what my role would be. I will not do, or I do not do any, actual implementations. But again, I'm there to make sure and to govern that what the vendor is going to provide them is what they need to actually be successful.
Right. Acting as like a sort of orchestration layer.
I'm an advisor. I call myself an advisor for that reason. I am there. I understand what the processes are. I will be able to ask the specific questions to the customer, to the vendors. As a sales rep, historically, what used to happen is I used to stay away from those gray areas in there. And if the vendor didn't, or if the customer didn't ask, they didn't ask. I'm going to be able to be here, as the eyes and ears of the customer and say, but what about this? And how come you didn't show me this? And that kind
Hmm.
of stuff.
Great.
So
And
there is a
what
question, but
just one
sorry,
last
Augie.
what size businesses do you like work with? Small, medium size? Like, do you have
Yes.
like a revenue range in any particular industries or a wide range?
And we can actually take this offline, Augie. But
Sure.
yeah, but at
Yeah,
the
I
end
have
of
to.
the day, it's all small. It's actually just SMBs. Revenue not really as important as size of the organization. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Great. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I have to connect the two of you anyway, so I'll do that.
Okay, great.
And yeah, to answer your question, like we at Man Trucks we do the whole cycle. When the
Yeah.
one upfront ask about data migration, right? So to give you an example, because just the one thing, like data migration used to be like like the less the information you have in the new system, better clean it up. But if you're talking about regulations, then you have you need 7 years financials and 7 years of quality data. But if you now they're in AI, the quality of the data matters to leverage machine learning and LLMs and productive analytics. And having data in the system versus manually also makes a big difference. So data migration is a whole new conversation now, right? I know Rob, you have a question, but I'm going to get to Drew
Yeah.
first. Drew is
Drew has
asking
a question. Yeah.
how much input from vendors should go into requirements since they are the subject matter experts. So I can take this. I mean, I think
Go.
for sure you want to listen to the vendor, right? And especially if you're talking with vendors, they're serving The whole idea is they're serving a large number of clients in your industry, right? So to make it simple, say you're manufacturing, they might have 10,000 clients, right? Or 1,000 clients, and they have or optimized their processes and system to standard best practices. So absolutely, listen, I think what we're trying to say here is know what you need before the listening starts so you don't get carried away with all the bells and whistles that they're about to come at you with. So
Yeah, because they're going to be the vendor is going to be, even though they're a subject matter expert, they're going to be selling their software. They're going to be trying to sell their software, right? So just be careful that what they're asking or what they're providing you is what you really need, like Chinkal said.
Rob, please go ahead.
Great session so far. My question is, sometimes with small to medium-sized businesses, they don't want to take as much time for requirements gathering as you'd like, or they insist that maybe the senior leadership are the ones to give you the requirements and they won't bring in some of the working level folks, and then you find out, speaking from experience, not with ERP, but you find out that like there's all these things that everybody needs, but it's 2 months into the implementation. So I would love to hear how you kind of insist on slowing down the process, getting people inclusive when you get pushback from clients who don't want to do that, or companies.
Yeah, I think we could probably both take a piece of this one. You're absolutely right that especially in these smaller businesses, in the larger ones, I'm assuming that the senior executive are not as engaged or giving their opinions because they're not doing the day to day. But the smaller guys, the smaller businesses where the owner or the senior executive, the president or whatever, is out there and he understands the processes and he says, he thinks that he knows. It's one of those really, really hard things to address, but it's really, really important to make sure that is, that is the case. Ask that stakeholder, the senior stakeholder, is there anything else? Is there anybody else that is doing specifics? Because at the end of the day, they're not going to catch everything. The worker bees of these smaller businesses are the guys that are going to be able to tell you the ins and outs and the exceptions and stuff like that, where the president might not even know what's happening on a daily basis.
Yeah, and Rob, what I have found works is I always frame the question to the leadership saying, if you don't invest the time now, we really can't accurately guarantee the budget, the KPIs of success, and the timeline, because we don't feel like we don't have the 90% picture. We have the 50% picture right now. So, the people who are signing the checks usually want to care about the on time, on budget, right,
Yeah.
and lower risk. And this typically so. We did a requirements document that was 120 pages, and that project still went over budget 40%. But because we did the requirements document, they told us what they knew at the time. They appreciated when the budget increased and they changed it. That, look, we could only allocate 1 week. You guys asked for a month. We heard you. We documented that. We're coming back to you now. We're okay with the budget increase. Obviously, it's not that smooth, but that budget increase conversation went much smoother because we had the dialogue up front saying the KPI delivery success will determine on how much time we spend up front. So
Yeah.
okay, great. Right on the mark, and I don't see any more questions. I know we're all part of so either Michael or my community here, so would love to. If you have any thoughts on how the webinar was structured, how it went well, and if you have any feedback for us, we'd love to hear it. Thank you so much for attending.